Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, shortcomings and failures. This morning, anger, anguish, and calls for accountability in Uvalde over a scathing preliminary report on the mass shooting at Robb Elementary. Investigators detailing what they call systemic failures and egregiously poor decision-making by hundreds of officers on the scene.
I'm sure they're hurting. I'm sure. But they need to confront all these parents and say that they're sorry.
We have team coverage with more on the findings and the fallout, plus more body cam video just released by police. Also developing this morning, investigators on the scene of another mass shooting, this time at a mall in Indiana. But we're learning about a witness who police say took down the gunman. On trial this morning, jury selection set to begin in the trial of former White House advisor Steve Bannon, the ex-Trump aide facing contempt charges for defying a subpoena from the January 6th committee, despite his 11th hour decision to agree to testify. We have details and analysis. Outbreak this morning, new cases of monkeypox multiplying nationwide as health officials push to get more people vaccinated. The new efforts to contain the virus and why some experts say it's already too late. And Bennifer forever. It's official. One of the world's most famous celebrity couples are now Mr. and Mrs. Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck tied the knot over the weekend, 2 decades after first getting together. More on their low-key Las Vegas ceremony, and you won't believe where J-Lo got her dress. And I just love that we picked up on this whole thing because of the records where she's changing her name.
That's how you do it. Good reporting.
I love it. I know. It's very exciting. We'll bring you that news later. Begin, though, with that new information coming out of the investigation into the deadly mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. On Sunday, the House committee investigating the massacre released the most comprehensive report to date.
Yeah, this new preliminary report offers a scathing critique of all agencies linked to the response. In the report's words, it was egregiously poor decision-making. That includes this moment, minutes after the gunman opened fire on 2 classrooms and a handful of officers retreated. Now, the report was released the same day as yet another mass shooting in America, this time at a mall near Indianapolis where 4 people, including the gunman, were killed and 2 others were hurt. We have full coverage this morning. Coming up, we're going to talk to Texas State Representative Dustin Burroughs, but we are going to start with NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson in Texas. Priscilla, good morning to you. So in an investigation that's really been clouded by misinformation, by finger pointing, this report attempts to take a more comprehensive look at the failures of the officers, the school, social media, and more. What are some of the big takeaways here?
Yeah, Joe, good morning. One of the biggest takeaways is just the sheer amount of law enforcement that was on scene as this event was unfolding. We're talking about some 376 officers, the majority of them state and federal law enforcement. And what we saw in this report is really spreading the blame across all of these different agencies. And I want to read part of that report. It says, quote, "At Robb Elementary, law enforcement responders failed to adhere to their active shooter training, and they failed to prioritize saving the lives of innocent victims over their own safety." The report also looks at the lack of a, quote, effective incident command. And what it says is that the school police chief, Pete Arredondo, who has taken a lot of heat over the past several weeks, may not have been in a position to establish command, and that people should have, officers should have seen that and established some sort of command. Someone should have taken over control there. And another really big piece of this report is all of the safety issues in and around the school. The fencing that the report says was inadequate, the exterior doors that were left unlocked, and also issues with the interior doors, including room 111, where the report says there was a faulty lock and that people knew that this lock was faulty and that it would take extra effort to get that door locked, and yet no work order was ever put in to fix that in the weeks leading up to this. So this report really focusing on a lot of different issues here and saying unequivocally that the void in leadership may have contributed to loss of life on that day. Joe,
so Priscilla, just days ago, the community had to respond to the video that was released. Now comes this report. What is the reaction there in Uvalde?
Yeah, people are angry. They want accountability, and they're saying, okay, now that this report is out here, what's going to be done about it? What's going to be changed? And speaking to several family members and people in the community over the past several days, folks aren't entirely sure that there is going to be that accountability. In fact, at yesterday's press conference, there was a man in the audience, and he shouted "cowards" as folks were speaking. And I spoke with that man after the press conference. He is the great-grandfather of Lexi Rubio, one of the victims from this tragedy. And I want to share some of our conversation. If you were to see Chief Arredondo right now, what would you say to him?
Tell him he should go, give up the batch, the gun, grab a mop, go to the school and be a janitor. That way he can go and hide in the closet instead of having to go and defend the kids.
He also said that this report means nothing, it changes nothing, and that is a sentiment that I've heard echoed by several people here.
Strong words there by that great-grandfather. Priscilla, real quickly, I want to ask you, the mayor of Uvalde announced that the acting police chief for the city department's now on administrative leave. Real quickly, what do we know about that?
That's right. His name is Lieutenant Mariano Pargas, and he has been placed on administrative leave as the city works to conduct its own internal investigation. The mayor said in that release that they are going to be looking at his actions on that day, whether he had a responsibility to take command of the scene, and whether or not he took any steps to do that or was able to do that. And so right now the city is waiting to get the statements that officers gave to the Department of Public Safety and gave to committee members during this investigation, and they're going to be looking at that information. And of course, the city already has all of this body camera footage, some 74 minutes that they released to the public overnight, again providing more insight into this frantic scene and what took place. Joe?
Priscilla Thompson in Uvalde. Priscilla, thank you.
For more now, we're joined by Representative Dustin Burroughs. He's a member of the Texas House of Representatives and the chair of the Texas House Committee investigating the shooting at Robb Elementary. Representative Burroughs, thanks so much for your time this morning. I mean, look, this report was hard to read. Frankly, it's hard to wrap your head around hundreds of officers being involved without more being done more quickly. I can't imagine what it's like for these families to get this information, but your committee has said this is the most comprehensive look at what happened that day. What was the most shocking part of this investigation to you?
Well, let me put it this way. I think the morning of the shooting, everybody on paper looked like they were prepared, whether it was a school district with the written policies they had or law enforcement who claimed they had active shooter training and knew how to have a broad multi-agency reaction to something like this. And what we found throughout was those systems failed. And what I believe is because of the false sense of security the people of Uvalde had, and I believe those systems are likely across the entire state of Texas and the rest of the nation, and that's why we put this in such very much detail so everybody else can take a look at this as well.
Representative, while you're speaking right now, we just were playing some of that surveillance video that was released, and it shows a lot of the officers seemingly just waiting in the hallway, and then also what was just playing there is where they're retreating, it looks like, from the sound of gunfire. I mean, I think a lot of reaction to this video has been, how is it possible that all of those trained officers' reaction was to head the other way? Is there anything in your findings that makes that make more sense? Did this come down to the lack of leadership?
So, look, we have an expectation and we have standards for our officers. In an active shooter situation, they're supposed to go into gunfire or figure out a way to actually make entry and save lives. There were officers clearly in that hallway who knew or should have known that there were victims in that room that were either being killed or dying, and they should have done more. Our report is very clear. That was the expectation, and they failed to meet that standard.
The impact on these families, of course, and the trauma on the community of Uvalde is impossible, I think, to overstate. First, I want to play something one of the victims' family members told us, and then we'll talk on the other side.
Do you think there will be any accountability?
Not really. Not what they should do to them.
Which is
like
what?
I said, in my book, they should fire them and take their pension away and give it to the parents that lost kids and the ones that the kids are traumatized because they were wounded. Okay, that's what I think they should do. Beginning with the superintendent and ending with the school board, starting with the mayor, the city, most of the city council, and the cops.
Now, Representative, yesterday at a news conference, I know you also said that any individual officer at the scene who didn't do more should be held accountable. Of course, we know nothing can bring back the lives lost, but what does justice, what does accountability look like in this case to you?
No, I share the sentiments and I stand by those statements. Accountability is very important in this situation. It is my hope that this report lays out the facts and is the seeds and starting in the building blocks of getting us to accountability in policy changes. And you're already starting to see at least, some modicum of that with, I think, a suspension here, recently in Uvalde by the mayor. I had the opportunity to meet with the families yesterday. I invited them to attend. We stood there. I stood there until they did not have any more questions for me about the facts. But I do believe now that we have a factual basis, you're going to start to see and want to see and need to see some accountability going forward.
Representative Dustin Burroughs, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Just hours after the release of that Uvalde report, there was yet another deadly mass shooting. This time, shots were fired at a mall in the suburbs of Indianapolis. 3 people plus the shooter are dead this morning. Police say a man walked into the mall with a long gun last night and opened fire. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has more on what happened.
Investigators this morning are searching for a motive behind America's latest mass shooting. This one in Indiana, they say it left 4 people dead, including the shooter, and at least 2 wounded, including a 12-year-old girl who we're told has minor injuries. This one happened in Greenwood, Indiana. It's just outside of Indianapolis, specifically at Greenwood Park Mall. Authorities say the shooter opened fire inside the mall food court with a long rifle, and they say several rounds of ammunition. What sets this one apart, authorities say, is that the carnage was curbed by a good Samaritan, a 22-year-old unnamed man who authorities say had a handgun on him legally, confronted the shooter, and they say shot and killed him. Authorities are not releasing the name of the good Samaritan at this point. They're also not releasing the names of the victims or the name of the shooter for that matter, but police did call that good Samaritan, quote, the hero of the day. And the mayor of Greenwood released a statement thanking the good Samaritan, saying this person saved lives. Now, of course, this mass shooting comes in a string of mass shootings this summer, including in cities like Buffalo, Uvalde, and Highland Park. According to the Gun Violence Coalition, there have been more than 349 mass shootings in the U.S. this year. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Maggie. Jury selection is set to begin today for the trial of former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. Bannon has been charged with 2 federal counts of criminal contempt after refusing to comply with subpoenas from the January 6 investigative committee. He potentially faces up to 2 years in prison and $200,000 in fines. If found guilty, he would be the first person to be convicted for contempt of Congress in 48 years. Bannon has pleaded not guilty to all charges. To walk us through this trial, we're joined by NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delanian and NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Good to have you both with us. Ken, I'll start with you. So just one day before the January 6th attack, Bannon seemed to be talking about what was to come. First, let's listen to that.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Just understand this. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. It's going to be moving. It's going to be quick.
So that there is some of the type of evidence the committee is looking to question Bannon on. Remind us here what his testimony would do for the January 6th committee and what role is the House panel accusing him of playing during the attack?
Good morning, Savannah. Well, in the subpoena for his testimony, the panel said that that statement that you just played suggested that Bannon had some foreknowledge of what was going to happen on January 6th. And they want to ask him about his activities at the Willard Hotel in the days before the riot, where he and Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, that lawyer for the Trump campaign, sort of convened what you might call a war room or a command center for the big lie, because they were in that hotel and they later billed the Trump campaign for those rooms. And they were calling members of state legislatures, trying to convince them to provide an alternate slate of electors. They were trying to put pressure on Vice President Mike Pence. This is all according to public reporting. And the committee wants to question Bannon and some of the other people about that. The reality is, though, it's very likely that they will never be able to get that evidence, at least from Steve Bannon, but they're getting it from other places, Savannah.
Danny, let's bring you in here. So the judge overseeing this case has put strict limits on the possible lines of defense for Bannon. Explain what those are and what you expect to see from this case as a result of those limits.
There's almost nothing left in terms of defense. Steve Bannon wanted to argue that he relied on the advice of his attorney, or that President Trump essentially through an attorney told him that he had to demand executive privilege. The judge has stripped away all of those and basically left the only defense being that whether or not he understood the timeline for compliance. That's not much of a defense. But yet, look for Bannon's defense to argue that this is a kind of political prosecution, even if they can't explicitly say so, to kind of crowbar that in. Now, remember, criminal contempt is different from civil contempt. Civil contempt is about forcing someone to comply with the court's wishes. Criminal contempt is like any other crime. You're punishing something for what they did in the past. So, if you rob a bank and offer to return the money, that doesn't get you out of criminal charges. In this case, just because Bannon may have offered in the last few weeks to testify and show up for the committee, that's not going to exonerate him either. So he has a difficult path ahead of him, his defense. But had those defenses remained in the case, I would have given the defense here a solid chance of winning. Now, going to be tough.
Ken, I want to ask you something about what Danny just mentioned. So Bannon's team recently informed the January 6th committee that he would now be willing to testify. Is that still the case? Could we still hear from him on this House committee now that his trial is no longer delayed?
It seems very unlikely, Savannah. They haven't said whether that offer is still on the table, but a lot of legal observers believe the whole point of that was to try to influence the trial or postpone the trial. Bannon was unsuccessful in that. And to Danny's point, even if he's convicted of these charges, he cannot be forced to testify. And, while the charges do carry, they're misdemeanors, they carry a penalty of up to a year in jail each. No one has ever gone to jail for contempt of Congress. And, this prosecution is likely going to be very unsatisfying for people who want to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th, because even if they convict Bannon, they're likely never to get his testimony, Savannah.
And Danny, last quick question just to follow up on what you were saying. So Bannon says his conversations with former President Trump are protected by executive privilege. What does that have to do here? How does that come in, even with those sort of limits on things?
Very little. It has almost nothing to do with this trial, mostly because the judge has stripped away those options for the defense. Now, if I were defending Bannon, I would want to make that a centerpiece of my defense. And it's essentially been taken away from Bannon. So look, they're not going into trial with a whole lot of options. They're just going to have to put up what they can and hope they can persuade a jury, or at least one juror, to hold out. But in reality, Bannon probably isn't sweating this too much because it's a federal misdemeanor. Most criminal defense attorneys have probably never had a case that's just a federal misdemeanor. They're not brought that often, which adds to Bannon's argument likely that this is a kind of political prosecution. That's the kind of thing a jury might not look too favorably on. So still, the odds are statistically against Bannon in this case.
All right, Danny Savalos, Ken Delaney, thank you both so much.
And the House committee investigating January 6th is gearing up for its 8th public hearing. This one is scheduled for prime time, taking place this Thursday night. The panel is expected to focus on former President Trump's alleged inaction while the Capitol was under siege. Committee member Adam Kinzinger offered a preview.
This is going to open people's eyes in a big way. The reality is, I'll give you this preview, the president didn't do very much, but gleefully watch television during this time frame. We're going to present a lot more than that. But I could only imagine I knew what I felt like as a U.S. congressman. If I was a president sworn to defend the Constitution, that includes the legislative branch, watching this on television, I know I would have been going ballistic to try to save the Capitol. He did quite the opposite.
The president didn't do anything?
The president didn't do anything, and we're going to fill those blanks in.
Joining us now is NBC News senior congressional reporter Scott Wong. Scott, good morning to you. So this next hearing will likely be the last one for some time, though the committee has hinted at more hearings later this year as it continues its investigation. So what can we expect in prime time on Thursday night?
Good morning, guys. What we can expect in prime time is the committee really zeroing in on what they are calling the 187 minutes. Now, that is the time between the sign of the first violence that we saw at the United States Capitol on January 6th until the moment when former President Trump then told his supporters to go home and go in peace. So 187 minutes elapsed. The committee says they are going to provide greater details and really fill in that picture as to what was happening behind the scenes during that time, talking to individuals who were in the White House there. They're vowing to provide testimony from new witnesses at this hearing that we have not seen or heard from in the previous 7 hearings. And so, yes, they are saying that this will be the last hearing in this sort of tranche of 8 hearings that we've seen over the course of this June and July. But they are saying that there is a possibility that as they uncover more and more evidence, that they could decide to, in fact, hold additional hearings later this year.
Scott, we know this House panel is very interested in getting those Secret Service text messages from January 5th and 6th that were apparently erased. The committee went so far as to actually subpoena the Secret Service last week. What's the latest there?
That's right. Committee members Zoe Lofgren and Adam Kinzinger say they expect to receive some of these text messages as early as Tuesday. Tuesday is important because that's the deadline that they have given the Secret Service to hand over these documents. Now, the Secret Service is saying that, there's nothing nefarious here. They said they did not permanently delete these messages. They say that these messages were lost on these iPhones during a normal migration of data, and that they say this information is retrievable. And they say that they are fully cooperating with the investigation with the January 6th committee. Now, the reason why these text messages are so important and of value to the January 6th committee is because they could corroborate key testimony from Cassidy Hutchinson, the former White House aide, who has alleged, based on conversations she had with other White House officials, that on January 6th, President Trump was trying to join his supporters, violent supporters, at the Capitol. And secondly, that he got into a physical altercation with some of his top security officials who were with him in the vehicle that day as he was, arguing with the Secret Service and trying to go to the Capitol. At one point, grabbing the steering wheel. At one point, grabbing towards the throat or the clavicle of one of his top officials. And so those text messages, the January 6th committee believes will hold the key to whether or not Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony can be corroborated.
All right, Scott Wong, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Now, a massive heat wave is making its way across the country this morning. Temperatures will hit over 100 degrees in the South and Midwest today, and they're expected to remain there for most of the week. More than 50 million Americans are forecast to be under dangerous heat advisories in the coming days. And the sustained heat is putting a strain on states' power grids as officials ask residents to conserve energy and reduce the amount of time spent using air conditioning.
So how hot is it going to get across the country? For more, let's check on your morning news now. Weather. Which
means Michelle Grossman is with us now. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, guys. This remains a really big story. We're going to see this heat wave continuing at least until next week. And it's not just in the U.S., it's global, too. I'll show you some numbers in Europe in just a bit. But first, back at home, we're looking at 35 million Americans under heat alert. And these heat alerts stretch from the west into the Intermountain West, the Midwest, and even into parts of the lower Mississippi Valley. So many alerts across the area. We're looking at heat advisories, heat watches, and heat warnings. But the heat stretches well beyond these alerts. We're looking at temperatures, 141 million Americans above 90 degrees today. Over 50 million Americans seeing temperatures into the triple digits. And we're looking at a lot of triple digits today. It's going to feel like 110 in many, many spots. That's pretty widespread across the plains. So looking at the temperatures for today, we're looking at 107 in Phoenix, 101 in El Paso, 101 in Denver. And then you get into the southern plains, Oklahoma into Texas. That's where we're seeing these draining temperatures day after day, still climbing into the triple digits. Dallas today, 109. 98 degrees in Houston. It's going to feel like 103. It'll feel like close to 100 in Minneapolis, and it will feel like 107, in Little Rock. And then tomorrow we're looking at temperatures into the triple digits once again in the central and southern plains. Oklahoma City, 109. That's what it's going to feel like. It'll feel like 110 in Little Rock. Notice New York City, it's going to feel like 93 tomorrow. And then we're really going to see those temperatures set in New York City, temperatures in the mid-90s. Wednesday, Thursday, 92 by Friday. So it's going to be a week long of temperatures in the 90s, probably a heat wave there. Now, it's extreme across the globe, too. So back at home, we have this area of high pressure. It won't budge. It's been stuck for about a month, and that's what's pumping in this hot air. But as we go across the pond and we go to Europe, we're looking at the same story. We're looking at temperatures well above normal for this time of year, a dangerous and deadly heat wave in Europe. Also looking at a lot of wildfires there. So we're looking at temperatures into the triple digits in Paris, 102 today and 105 tomorrow. And you guys, we're looking at temperatures into the triple digits in London, too. So this is far-reaching. It's not just the U.S.
President Biden is back at the White House after a critical 4-day trip to the Middle East. Biden vowed to remain engaged in the region going forward, despite a contentious meeting with Saudi Arabian leaders, impacting his ability to establish a security pact with other countries. NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett joins us now from the White House with more. Hey, Maura, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah. President Biden visited Israel and met with Palestinian leaders as well on the trip, but it's all being overshadowed by this decision and controversy to meet with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We saw that precluding the trip, and it's returned home again with him. People are very frustrated. He's facing harsh criticism over what was actually accomplished on the trip and whether it was worth it at all. That criticism coming from Americans and lawmakers alike. One Democrat saying that fist bump was worth 1,000 words.
Returning home, President Biden shielding himself from criticism over his trip to the Middle East.
The Saudi foreign minister says he didn't hear you accuse the Crown Prince of Khashoggi's murder. Is he telling the truth? No. Do you regret the fist pump, Mr. President? Why don't you guys talk about something that matters? I'm happy to answer questions that matter.
But to those across the political spectrum today, it does matter.
I don't think that that type of government should be rewarded with a visit by the President of the United States.
It's not just progressives pushing back. Moderate Democrat Adam Schiff calling the interaction a visual reminder of the continuing grip oil-rich autocrats have on U.S. foreign policy. As Republican lawmakers say the trip is a slap to the face of American oil and gas producers. And while the president brought home a Saudi commitment to pump more oil, hopefully checking off one item on the domestic agenda,
the president is unequivocal by not calling mission accomplished on any of this.
He's still facing low approval ratings and record high inflation.
Inflation is absolutely killing many, many people. And can't we wait to make sure that we do nothing to add to that?
Senator Joe Manchin halting the president's economic proposal. He says over tax hikes and climate spending, though critics cite coal being a major economic driver in West Virginia.
Now there's also skepticism that Manchin's holdup has something to do with campaign contributions from corporations that would suffer from this economic plan. But the White House is touting successes from the trip in the form of climate commitments and technology progress in the Middle East. Now, in terms of that specific ramp up on oil, it could be weeks or even months until we get any firm details on that. That's because OPEC, the group that regulates oil, isn't set to meet until early next month. Savannah.
All right, Maura Barrett, thank you so much. Now, those scorching temperatures here are also being felt across the pond in Europe, which is in the midst of a historic heat wave. It's causing massive wildfires across much of Western Europe as crews work around the clock to contain the fires spreading in countries like France, Spain, and Portugal. And a national emergency has been declared in the United Kingdom as temperatures there are expected to shatter records and reach 105 degrees. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us now from Rome, somewhere we also know it's been quite warm. At least, Claudio, you look ready for the heat and the sunshine today. Good morning. What more can you tell us about these wildfires that are burning all over Western Europe? I mean, is there any progress in containing them?
Hey, Savannah, let me start from Italy here. Italian meteorologists are saying that we are entering the hottest week of the year. But let me tell you, to be honest, every single week since the start of May, I felt the hottest week of the year, because since the start of May, we've been experiencing temperatures of between the 90s and 100 degrees. But while there are, Italy is supposed to at least know how to cope with hot weather, as you said, there are some other countries, as you mentioned, like the UK, that is certainly not not prepared for that. As you mentioned, 105 degrees today and tomorrow. That is the highest temperature ever recorded in the UK. They are telling people not to take public transport unless, of course, it's strictly necessary. They are spreading salt on the roads for fear that they melt. You mentioned the forest fires. Of course, forest fires throughout the week too, in Portugal, in Spain, but now also in France, where they called it the fire of the century. There were 16,000 people who had to be evacuated in the south of France because of that, Savannah.
And Claudio, you mentioned the United Kingdom. I mean, because this is unusual for them, they don't really have the air conditioning capacity there in the UK. What are they doing to keep people safe?
Well, they are advising them, as you know, you will advise anyone anywhere around the country, anywhere around the world when it's so hot. Get hydrated, avoid staying in the sun, check out on your neighbors, especially the elderly, that they are okay, avoid public transport. They're also telling them to try to avoid, trains. The trains are running at reduced speed because it's so hot that they fear that the rails may be deteriorated or deformed or even bent, and that is very dangerous. So they are telling them to stay put and resist at least a couple of days, because fortunately for the UK, in a couple of days' time, the temperatures will drop to regular levels. Unfortunately for Italy and the rest of Europe, it will not, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight for this heat wave for this part of the world, at least.
Claudio, are officials citing climate change as a reason for any of this?
Yes, they are. They are definitely blaming climate change. They are saying that around the world they've already seen an increase in the past few decades of more than 1 degree, and all we are experiencing right now is down and is due to climate change. And that is why they say this is not a one-off. This is only going to become the new norm, and this can only get worse unless we do something about it, and fast.
All right, Claudio Lubanga, stay cool, stay safe. Thank you so much. We're back with the latest on the battle against the monkeypox virus. Cases continue to rise across the country, with here in New York City as the epicenter of the nation's outbreak. According to the CDC, the city accounts for more than 30% of U.S. monkeypox cases. Officials are trying to fight the virus head-on, opening 3 mass vaccination sites, and another clinic is expected to open soon. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joins us now with the latest from one of those vaccination centers. She's here in Manhattan. Antonia, good morning. Now, one of the big issues we've been hearing about with monkeypox was a lack of vaccine supply. So what's the latest with that? Do these sites have what they need?
That's right, Savannah. To paint a picture for you, on Friday evening, the city made available 9,200 slots for first shots of the monkeypox vaccine. And that went live at 6 p.m. By 6:07, every slot was gone. And consistently, people who have been trying to get access to this vaccine have described the attempt and the website portals in order to get slots for these vaccine shots like something like the Hunger Games. So there's immense need here, and health officials say that in the coming days and weeks, they want tens of thousands more vaccines here on the ground, and they say it's really urgent here, not just in New York, which is the epicenter, but around the country. Take a listen to the New York City Health Commissioner describing the need here.
We need tens of thousands of doses. We're still working on the total number we think we need, but we've gotten a total of about 20,000 vaccines from the federal government to date, and we need much, much more than that. I think tens of thousands more, yeah. We need significantly more vaccine than we've gotten, and this will be a process that will take weeks to get all the people. If we get the supply that we need, it'll take weeks to get shots into arms.
Because the need here is so severe, Savannah, right now they are focused on getting first shots into as many arms as possible, even though this is a 2-shot regimen. This has some health officials a little nervous because 2 shots is what really gives people the full protection against this virus. But right now, as health officials scramble to get ahead of a virus that frankly got its foothold in New York before the testing and vaccination infrastructure was ready, they feel they need to focus on just getting as many first shots into people as they can, Savannah.
And Antonia, how are they prioritizing who is getting that first round?
Well, right now, eligibility is severely restricted, and it's focused on men who have sex with men, bi, transgender people, people who have anonymous or multiple sexual partners. And the reason that they're focused on that group of individuals is just because that's where the outbreak started. I want to be really clear that this is not a sexually transmitted disease. It's a disease that can spread to anyone with close contacts. And so certainly, even if you don't fit that initial eligibility guideline, you should be reaching out to health officials or to your PCP if you feel that you've had close contact with someone who has monkeypox, or that you have concerns for your own health for whatever reason. Again, it started in this community, and because there's restricted supply, they need to focus on getting shots into those arms. But there is no reason why other folks in New York shouldn't be on high alert right now and paying great attention, because this is a disease that can spread to anyone, Savannah.
And Antonia, of course, we just went through a massive vaccine rollout with COVID-19, and New York was the epicenter then. We had to learn a lot of lessons. Anything we're taking from that here with monkeypox that we learned?
Well, a lot of the lessons learned here in New York City focus around equity. And equity is something that's really challenging to accomplish when you are in a situation of scarcity. There aren't that many resources. People are scrambling. New York has also had technical issues with the website where they have been doling out the appointments. And so equity has been difficult to accomplish, but it has been front of mind. The way that New York has tackled this so far is by making sure that they're setting up clinics for these vaccines in every single one of the boroughs. Here in Chelsea, this site where I am today was the very first site. And while Chelsea is known as a more upscale neighborhood in Manhattan, it also is where so many, a large portion of the cases have come from. And so they really wanted to get in there, get the vaccine very locally available to those who would need it first. But they are making sure that that infrastructure spreads around the city. Take a listen again to the health commissioner here.
While doing this, we're also really focusing on equity, so making sure that we're putting enough shots in arms quickly, while also ensuring that we're getting enough vaccine out to communities that are hardest to reach. One of the biggest lessons from COVID was how important it is to build that in from the beginning and to ensure that we're reaching the hardest to reach communities from the beginning of our vaccination campaign.
Despite all those efforts, when you talk to people who've been on the ground at these vaccination sites, they say it's been incredibly difficult, that at times people who know someone who works in the health department or who just happen to be on the website at the right time have been able to get those shots and those appointments. And so the city is actively trying right now to make sure that the process of actually booking these appointments for the people who need them is more equitable and more easily accessible, Savannah.
All right, Antonia Hilton, thank you so much.
Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, good to have you with us. So we mentioned this virus is spreading quickly, so it's important to understand how it can be transmitted. So first, tell us more how the virus is spreading, what's considered close contact, and then also what are the symptoms and how soon would you start seeing those symptoms?
Joe, all great questions. This is a virus that really requires close skin-to-skin contact, and it's really from these rashes and characteristic lesions that look almost like pimples and having prolonged contact. What does prolonged mean? It's definitely more than seconds and minutes, and so it's usually repeated contact with those lesions or close contact with respiratory secretions. So think again, someone coughing very close to you, and if you have breaks in the skin or if they're right in your face. So those are all the characteristic ways. And the good news is that transmission is nowhere near as easy as it is with COVID or with some of our other respiratory illnesses. So I want to put that context into place.
Let's talk details on the vaccine here. So it consists of 2 doses. How soon after you receive the first dose should you get your second shot, and anything else people should know about this one, especially since we've been talking about another vaccine for a long time now?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 doses, 4 weeks apart. Sounds very familiar. It's similar to COVID vaccines. Here's the big difference, Savannah. This is only licensed for 18 and above. So there is not an availability under 18 unless you request special permission from the Food and Drug Administration. I highlight that because it's incredibly rare to get hospitalized from monkeypox, but those who could be hospitalized are often young, under the age of 8, pregnant women, and people who have immunocompromised or chronic conditions that make their immune system decrease. That's why it's important to get the word out about the signs and symptoms of monkeypox and get tested.
So if you're not eligible for the vaccine or you're struggling to get your hands on the vaccine right now, what are the things you can do to protect yourself?
All right, couple of things. Number one, don't just assume that somebody who says, yeah, I had this unusual rash and I haven't had time to get it checked out, don't assume anything about that. Encourage them to get checked out by a health professional if they have an unexplained rash, especially, Joe, because what we're seeing are patients presenting with a rash first, often in the mouth or in the face area, and then sometimes in the genital area or arms and hands. And then keep a distance from anybody suspected. And then the basics apply here, washing your hands. If you feel like you can't isolate from that individual, it can be helpful to wear a mask and to take some of the precautions that we do take to avoid getting contagious with a close contact, household member, family member, friend that might be undergoing evaluation for monkeypox. It can take 4 to 21 days from first infection to getting those pimples to that rash to then scab and heal over, at which time you are no longer infectious if you are diagnosed with monkeypox. So it can be a long duration, but again, very rare to end up in the hospital.
Seems like a pretty good rule of thumb to get an unusual rash checked out.
Get all those rashes checked out.
I would. No, exactly.
Right.
No, it's good to hear. Yeah.
All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you as always.
Thank you.
NBC News has been getting a first-hand look at how the country is confronting gun violence on the ground.
Yeah, as part of that coverage, Jesse Kirsch spent the night on a rare ride-along with 2 Philadelphia patrol officers who are focusing on the relationship between drugs and guns.
Jesse joins us now from Independence Hall in Philadelphia with more on the police ride-along. And before we start, we do want to warn you some of the images you're going to see in this report might be disturbing. So, Jesse, first, walk us through what you saw during this ride-along, and are police able to do anything about the crime they're seeing while they're on patrol?
Yeah, guys, good morning. And we chose this location for our report just to speak to the contrast of what's going on here in Philadelphia. Of course, Independence Hall is where the Declaration of Independence was signed. This is, in many ways, the beginning of America, the beginning of the dream of this country. But here's what is also going on in this country today. Riding along with police officers into the overnight hours on Saturday evening, we saw people openly shooting up with drugs, with needles in various body parts throughout the night. People sleeping on the street, people in some cases appearing to be high, slumped over in various positions on the street. There were what we were responding to, according to police, were domestic calls, people wrestling with a knife nearby, a child present, a child that was standing alone on the street. There were multiple calls where they thought they were going to shooting incidents. Turned out, thankfully, those were just fireworks, it appeared, being fired off. But there were also shootings. Police tell us there were 2 shootings just before we joined them, including one in which 4 people were shot. And here is some of what police told us, because while all of that is going on, again, we saw people also using drugs actively, but police told us, when I asked them why they don't stop to deal with the drugs, it is because if they are to get involved with a narcotics investigation there, that means that hours are taken up on that, and then they can't wind up dealing with a shooting, which they expect at any time. Here's what they told us about the problems they're facing.
So, you know, with the manpower situation that we have going on, not only just in this district, but in the city in general, if we allocate most of our time to, you know, be able to go out and confiscate any illegal narcotics, basically that's going to eliminate us 2 from the streets for a few hours. The issue becomes now, if we're off the street for a few hours, then no one else is getting either any calls for service for when that violent call does come out, or any officers that might be in need, foot pursuits, assists. We're not there for it because now we're stuck.
And just to underscore that every second counts, we know that in a medical emergency, right? But if those police officers beat paramedics to the scene, they are the ones who, what they call scooping up. They take the gunshot victim in the back of their police car to the hospital first. So every second counts. And so that means that they have to make a tough decision, Joe and Savannah, about not even trying to stop someone from using drugs right in front of them, literally feet from where we were driving.
I mean, Jesse, they see so many people struggling day in and day out. You got to imagine this is tough on them. How do they handle the emotional aspect of working this job?
Yeah, and if it's not hard enough to just see, for some of them, it's literally personal. 2 of the police officers we met on Saturday said they've seen in the area they patrol, which is called Kensington, the area we were in North Philadelphia, they've seen people that they grew up with who have developed, unfortunately, drug problems and are now in this area where there are obviously also families living. We saw children. There were children bouncing a basketball on the street, children with their families in the street. And not far from where we were unfortunately seeing people struggling with drugs, and also in an area again where police are bracing for violence. Here's what the officers told us about what this job does to them mentally and how they have to get ready.
I think it's just a mental preparation for the volume of calls that we're going to handle and the unknown of what we're going to handle. You know, it could be anything from a shooting to a domestic to theft of auto. We don't know what we're coming into, and a lot of times when we respond to these jobs, we don't know what we're going to. So I think it's just a mental preparation for the volume and the unknown of what we're heading into.
So, you know, again, that was evident when we were with them. There was one time we were pulling over a vehicle because police say they'd got a report of a man with a gun in that vehicle. And so in that situation, obviously they're walking up to a traffic stop and they then are conducting a search. So obviously things change very rapidly, and we saw that certainly with the types of incidents that we were following along with the officers on Saturday night.
Jesse Kirsch, we appreciate your reporting, the reporting of all our NBC News colleagues who are out on the streets across America this weekend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
He's the star of Breaking Bad, but actor Bryan Cranston got a bad break at batting practice for the MLB celebrity softball game. The 66-year-old actor was hit in the right shoulder by a line drive hit off the bat of actor Anthony Ramos this weekend. Cranston doubled over for a couple minutes before heading to his nearby trailer. He later returned saying, quote, "I might be more of a cheerleader in this game." Cranston was later ejected from the game after getting into a heated argument with the umpire after a third strike call. It got so bad, actor J.K. Simmons needed to restrain him. Cranston even grabbed a bucket filled with bubble gum, ran to home plate, and threw it at the umpire. This was, of course, all a joke. Oh. Not legit.
What?
But Cranston definitely knows how to steal a show. I think the beard and the hair being all over the place probably added to the mystique.
I was like, wow, also Ramos with a line drive.
Exactly,
Dang.
I know.
Okay.
Tough guy. All right.
Yeah.
It is the marriage our Y2K selves only ever dreamed about. Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck, also known as Bennifer, are officially finally married after a year of dating.
Yeah, court records show the couple received their marriage license on Saturday from Clark County, Nevada. That's where Las Vegas is, of course. Youth and internet culture reporter Callan Rosenblatt joins us now for more on the surprise wedding. Hey, Callan, good morning. So, I mean, there was no wind-up, no leaks earlier, no big celebrity guest list. Give us the details about this wedding that sort of surprised us. What do we know about where and the ceremony, and was it as glamorous as you'd think it might be?
Yeah, very surprising. 17 years apart, back together now. Love is very patient. What we know about this wedding, they flew to Vegas on Saturday. They got their license. They waited in line with 4 other couples. J-Lo wore a dress that apparently she's been holding on to for many, many years. It is a white dress that she said was used in a movie. Ben Affleck wore a jacket that he's been holding on to. And what we know from the court records is that Jennifer Lopez is now Jennifer Affleck. So we're going to have to figure out what that abbreviation is now. Is it J-Fleck? Is it J-Aff? What are we going with? But very exciting. They said they have the greatest witnesses. They didn't specify who they were, but very glamorous wedding regardless.
J-Aff. Jaff.
Jaff.
That might work.
Jaff.
I don't know.
She's got to keep the J-Lo. Yeah.
Is there anything more we know about this dress? You said it's thrifty. What else can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so J-Lo said that this was a dress that she had saved from a movie. We know it is, from a few years ago, with some people speculating that maybe it's from a movie around the first time that Ben and Jen dated. We don't know that for a fact, but there's a lot of speculation that maybe she was holding on to this, hoping that maybe they would come back together. We're going to have to wait to hear more from the queen herself, but it was a beautiful dress. Beautiful ceremony held in what she called a little white chapel. We don't know if it's the little white chapel where many celebrity weddings have been held in the past. So again, we're waiting for a few more details, but very beautiful photos, very loving photos coming out from that ceremony as well.
Leave it to J-Lo to just slip on a dress from 17 years ago. Yeah. Callan, why is it different for them now? I mean, they were together 17 years ago. We were obsessed with them then. They break up. What have they said about their partnership this time around?
Yeah, again, as I mentioned, J-Lo says love is very patient. They've been through many other relationships. They've had kids. They've gotten married, divorced. They've lived a lot of life, and life has brought them back together at this time. And it just seems like the right fit. They seem very in love, and it seems like they couldn't wait any longer. 20 years is a long time, and 17 years apart, seems like they couldn't wait any longer to be man and wife.
Callan Rosenblatt, thank you so much. Good stuff.
Love is patient, love is kind, love is thrifty, all those things.
Yeah,
all right.
exactly.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.